My name is Josh Kavensky. I'm a reporter from the Kyiv Post. Tonight, we will discuss whether or not Vladimir Groysman's new government can really bring change to Ukraine. We will examine the new law that could make it much harder for Russian emigres to live in Latvia. We will mark the 30-year anniversary of the Chornobyl disaster. And finally, we are going to discuss the ongoing political fallout from the Panama Papers revelations. In the meantime, you can download our podcast on Mixcloud. If you want to follow us in other media, we also have a website, int.hromadske.tv, where you can find all of our interviews, full and uncut, uploaded. We also have an app that you can download. You can go to iTunes, search Hromadske International. There you can find an app that'll update you with all of our stories. It'll have links to all of our videos and make sure that you can keep in touch with us throughout the week. And we'll join you in a second with a segment. So Vladimir Groysman's new government, can it fix Ukraine? As you can see from that lovely plasma. It's been over a week since he was appointed prime minister, and the government is hoping now to get back to business after 2 months of deadlock that was sparked by the unexpected and fairly bombshell resignation of former economy minister Ivaris Abramovičius. The new government has sparked a range of reactions. Some say that it is not going to really bring any reform to Ukraine, that it represents a revanche of the oligarchs, whereas others say that maybe, now Poroshenko has full control of all aspects of government, at least both the cabinet of ministers and the presidential administration. Maybe now, through willpower, he can change things. But the EU Enlargement Commissioner Johannes Hahn was in Kyiv this past week, meeting with the new government, including Groysman, as you can see from his tweet there. Hahn gave Ukraine around 100 days for reform, calling for, among other things, the appointment of an independent prosecutor to replace Shokin, one that could actually go after corruption and related rule of law issues. He called for a strengthening of other anti-corruption institutions. He called for re-engaging with foreign lenders, such as the IMF, the most important one. And finally, he also called for a number of different trade policies that he wants Ukraine to enact. But he wants all that to be done in the first 100 days, so it shows the EU's priorities for Ukraine. At the same time, many remain deeply skeptical of the new government. The Kyiv Post, for example, which you should all be reading constantly, especially if you're interested in Ukraine, had a fairly strongly worded editorial this past week saying that the best idea we have heard recently involves Western economic and visa sanctions against selected members of Ukraine's corrupt elite. The hope is that the credible threat of sanctions, combined with sweeter carrots and tougher sticks, may finally get Ukraine's leaders to change. So in effect, calling for Western sanctions is a way to enact rule of law sort of from afar on Ukraine. That being said, some are more sanguine about Ukraine's future. Among them is Atlantic Council Eurasia Center Deputy Director Alina Polyakova, who was in Kyiv this past week for meeting with government officials and others. I caught up with her outside the presidential administration this past week, and we got to discuss her decidedly more optimistic perspective on Ukraine's new government. So take a look. So first question, what's your perspective on the new government? Does this represent some sort of oligarch revanche? Or can we kind of expect something productive to come from the new government led by new Prime Minister Vladimir Groysman?
Look, I think, to be honest with you, this new government coalition and the new ministers that were appointed, as particularly the Prime Minister, are not as bad as particularly Western media have been saying. To be honest with you, this is Poroshenko's last chance to show that his government can actually deliver the kinds of reforms that Western organizations, Western policymakers are waiting for the government to do, and also the Ukrainian people are waiting for the government to do, to be honest with you. And I think there's a lot of awareness within the Ukrainian government now, among these new officials, that this is really their last stance. And for Poroshenko, this is his last opportunity to show that he only has himself to blame if something goes wrong. You can't blame the Prime Minister anymore, who's against you. You can't blame the Prosecutor General, who's corrupt. The new officials are in some ways handpicked by Poroshenko himself. We know them to be sort of Poroshenko's people, in a sense, to be loyal to him. So now the government cannot deliver the kinds of reforms it has to deliver in a short time period. There'll be nobody else to blame except Poroshenko himself.
But I want to push you on that a little bit. Couldn't they always make the argument that the Rada isn't entirely under their control? And that because of that, there's always somebody else to blame, isn't there?
Of course, right? But like I said, they have gone through that period already. they blamed the Rada, they blamed the PM, right? Now the coalition is going to be difficult. It's going to be much harder to get the votes they need to push the reforms. And I think on economic reforms that are deeply unpopular because they'll be more painful for the Ukrainian public, they're going to face a lot of opposition. But they have no choice. Ukraine is not a country that can take a lot of risks and chances at this point through political deal making. And I say that because Ukraine is dependent on international institutions. Western countries, we have our own problems, in the US in particular, with the current election cycle, but we're not beholden to international aid and to a particular program of reform. Ukraine is. And if they can't get it done, I think we can't rule out the possibility of there being another protest movement. And I think the government is aware of that. I think the parliament is aware of that. I think the new PM, because he used to be the speaker of the parliament, is now in a good position to be able to cooperate with the parliament, to bring them on board with the government's agenda. So I think Groysman is in a good position to be able to do what he needs to do.
So you're striking a slightly different tone, not slightly, a pretty big, strikingly different tone from what much of the media, both in the West and really in Ukraine too, has been saying about this new government, is that they're not reformists, that it represents, essentially just a return to, even some have said, the days of Yanukovych. Could you respond to that, kind of explain why you think that it's something entirely different?
I never said this was a reform-minded government.
Okay.
I think the reformers that were here before, like the Minister of the Economy, the Minister of Finance, they're out of government, right? This experiment with having foreigners in government seems to be over for Ukraine. What I'm saying is that at this point, all these people have some history, right? Nobody has clean hands, to say the least. But on the other hand, it is a much more centralized government in terms of its power structure under the president. But that is important and key, not because they're reform-minded, but because now there's nobody else to blame, as I said, because Ukraine has no other choice, right? This is their last chance. So it's not that I think these people are all good or all bad. I think it's much more nuanced than that. I think all of them have sketchy histories, just to put it more mildly. But on the other hand, I think this is an opportunity for them to show that they can, through this more cohesive, centralized, power vertical, that they can do the things they have to do. Like I said, I don't think they want to push these reforms through, but they have no other option.
So that was Alina Polyakova from the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. You can watch the full video online on our website, int.hromadske.tv. Make sure to do that, and you can watch all of our full content there. And we will rejoin you in 1 second. Since Russia started going down a more extreme path of repression following the 2011 Bolotnaya protests and the 2014 annexation of Crimea, thousands of Russians have emigrated to the half-Russian-speaking country of Latvia in the Baltics. However, in a blow to those emigres, you could say, Latvia's parliament passed amendments to its immigration law this past week, which now mandate that immigrants from Russia must pay a €5,000 fee per family member to renew 5-year living permits in the Baltic nation. Many of these hit by the law came after the winter 2011 Bolotnaya protests, whereas many others came after the 2011 annexation of Crimea. A lot of them just didn't want to support the the government that annexed Crimea with their tax dollars and decided to leave. Reactions to this have been negative. Peter Leonid, a journalist with the Associated Press, tweeted that it's very important, very worrying news in how Latvia is senselessly punishing the emigre Russian community. I Skyped with independent Russian journalist Leonid Ragozin yesterday, who was in Moscow reporting a story for Bloomberg. Ragozin lives in Latvia, so he's directly affected by this law, and he gave an interesting perspective on why it happened and what's going to change because of it. So my first question is, could you describe what this new law in Latvia is? Who is it targeting? What does it really do?
Well, we're talking about amendments to the law on on residence in Latvia, on temporary and permanent residence in Latvia. And the change concerns people who have acquired temporary residence by investing in the Latvian economy. Usually, most of these people are middle-class Russian citizens. That's about 9,000 out of 12,000 who have applied for temporary residence under this program. And what they did in practice is that they bought flats in Riga, and usually most of these people don't have enough money to afford it, but they sold their properties in Moscow, which are fairly expensive, and they swapped them for properties in Riga. So they've changed their lives completely. What is changing for them now, and that's a very sudden and abrupt change, and that was not part of the there was not in the rules of the game before it started, is that they have to pay 5,000 euros per each member of the family once they need to renew this temporary residence permit, and that comes in 5 years after they received it. So basically, if you have a family of 4 and you want to renew this permit, you need to pay 20,000 euros, which most of these people just can't afford because they are not rich oligarchs or state officials or criminals. There's plenty of this kind of people in Latvia too, all of whom moved from Russia partly or permanently. But people who are going to be hit by this new amendments most are middle-class people, most of whom fled to Latvia because of the dictatorial regime in Russia.
So it's mostly people fleeing political repression in Russia, or at least who don't want to take part in the political atmosphere there. I mean, in that case, why did the Latvian parliament pass this law? What's the atmosphere there that led to this?
Well, I guess the main issue there is ignorance and arrogance. The amendments were initiated by far-right nationalists who appear to be anti-Russian and anti-Putin, but since they are also they also promote anti-immigrant and anti-EU agenda on many issues. They ally with pro-Russian parties in the parliament. So in bringing up this particular amendment, they were once again siding up with pro-Russian forces in Latvia.
And so, I mean, what's for the average, middle-class Russian who's moved to Riga or just moved anywhere in Latvia, what's their day-to-day life? What has it looked like up till now? Has there been like a visible anti-immigrant sentiment? And after this law is passed, what's, in terms of like day-to-day things, what's going to change?
Well, speaking of anti-immigrant sentiments, there is a peculiar situation in Latvia because, of course, Latvia is divided into the Latvian-speaking and Russian-speaking community, and there have been serious tensions between them. But now, with the anti-immigrants sentiments, there's you can see them approaching the sort of extreme anti-EU forces in the Latvian-speaking part of society, and similar forces in the Russian-speaking community.
And I mean, to what extent is this law? To what extent does it fit into this sort of global trend of far-right movements, nativist movements, and is it more that, or is it really direct control manipulation by the Kremlin?
I don't think it is direct control. It is a direct manipulation by the Kremlin. I think it just it complies with the general trend, which plays in Kremlin's hand, the trend of emerging and expanding anti-EU sentiments and anti-immigrant sentiments that ultimately lead to disintegration of European Union's joint foreign policy and European Union as such, and this is very much in the interests of the Kremlin. All these individual politicians and parties that may use a lot of toxic anti-Russian rhetoric or anti-Kremlin rhetoric. In reality, when it comes to specific laws, they do play in the hands of the Kremlin. And there were many examples of this. And in fact, last fall, the same very forces, the National Alliance in the Latvian Parliament and the Union of the Greens and the Peasants, they pretty much precipitated the fall of the government, arguing against the acceptance by Latvia of a few more refugees from Syria and other countries, upon which the European Commission insisted. The issue was about an extra 200 refugees. And that's very little in comparing to the population of Latvia, which is 2 million. But it did lead to a major government crisis, and coupled with a few other issues, it eventually precipitated the fall of the government.
Okay, Leonid, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on.
Thank you for having me.
Great, thanks a lot. This Tuesday will mark 30 years since the partial meltdown of a nuclear reactor at the Chornobyl power plant not far from Kyiv. The disaster killed hundreds in the Soviet Union, many of whom were liquidators sent in to clean up the damage, and spewed radiation across Europe, as you can see on that video there of the hours following the disaster. The zone of exclusion, which is not so exclusive because of corruption in the local enforcement, will likely remain uninhabitable for millennia, and that's because of the radiation. Hromadske journalist Maxim Eristavi sat down with Rebecca Harms, a German member of the European Parliament, also from the Green Party, to discuss ongoing efforts to make the situation better surrounding Chernobyl, and also noting interestingly that Germany's recent turn towards green energy has largely been motivated by nuclear disasters, the first one being Chernobyl and the much more recent Japanese disaster at Fukushima. So take a minute and watch Max's interview with Rebecca.
I wanted to ask you that you participated in this huge, lavish conference in Kyiv regarding Chernobyl tragedy. What's your impression? Does the conversation goes in the right way, and what kind of main goals people want to achieve 30 years after Chernobyl? Is this tragedy is over for the country?
So I think all those who tend to believe that this tragedy or this catastrophe can be over, they make a huge mistake. So there was a time before Chernobyl. There will never be a time after. There will be a time since. And people have to live with the unlimited consequences of the radioactive fallout, and especially for Russians, for Ukrainians, and for people in Belarusia. It's very, very important to know this, because only if you are aware of the impact of radiation you live with, you can protect yourself.
Well, the general consensus that issues related to health impact are being overlooked and largely ignored in the countries that are the most affected, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. And we're talking about millions of people living in contaminated zones still and being affected by Chernobyl tragedy on everyday basis 30 years after the tragedy. Why do you think that the health issues are mostly ignored and still are not the main priority for local governments?
maybe it sounds a bit too easy approach or analysis, but so playing down the problems on site with the technologies for the cleanup, playing down this is necessary maybe because same people in the same time want to use nuclear energy as a clean way to produce electricity. And playing down the health consequences in the most affected countries, I think has the same reason. Russia, Ukraine, and also Belarusia, they want to prolong their nuclear programs, their nuclear power programs. And I think having too much concerns or awareness of health impacts of these catastrophes 30 years ago makes it more a problem. If you look across Europe today, you can find the proof that as predicted, several different kinds of cancers, the numbers are growing, especially thyroid cancers, but meanwhile also breast cancers and leukemia. And it's exactly also in the periods scientists had predicted the increase of those cancers that they happened. And so meanwhile, we cannot protect those who already died, yeah, because there will be a lot of fatal cancers among those. But we can better protect so those people who are living in the contaminated areas, and we can do more to protect children.
In Ukraine, nuclear energy sometimes is being considered as an important alternative. At the same time, you represent the Green Party. It's your part of your political agenda to fight against nuclear energy. But at the same time, I wanted to ask about this global phenomenon of Energiewende, which is basically a movement in the last years that make out of Germany the first advanced economy that gets so much clean energy as a part of everyday energy consumption. 30% of German energy comes from clean sources. But at the same time, when you look at Ukraine, it's a developing country that struggles to just find enough resources for anything. And it has such an advanced nuclear energy sector. It's easy coming from Germany to say, like, you need guys more clean energy resources, but at the same time, it will take years and years of investments. How do you offer something like that to a developing country and make sure that developing country invests in clean energy?
I think for Ukrainians today is really important to understand that Energiewende in Germany happened because of Chernobyl and Fukushima. So after Chernobyl, there was already a clear majority against nuclear in Germany among the citizens, and the political pressure began to do something as alternative to this high-risk technology around nuclear. And so since 1986, there were better technical developments in Germany. When Fukushima happened, the technology was already there, yeah? And we could push a bit more than before, and all political parties after Fukushima agreed. So it took us also 2 nuclear catastrophes, tremendous catastrophes, to completely change our political approach on the energy sector. But what I find bizarre is that one of the countries which suffered most from Chernobyl, Ukraine, is still not able to rethink from top, at least, the energy strategy. We are right now in Ukraine, I would say, in a very interesting moment for changing also energy strategies. There is a lot of investment needed because Ukraine wants to become more independent from Russia. Ukraine also wants to become more efficient. So why not now deciding a strategy which really fits to come out of high-risk technologies like nuclear, which fits to fight global warming, and which in the end will also be less cost intense. So if we invest now into new energy sources, I would say Ukraine should not stick in the past, but should go for the future.
That was Rebecca Harms from the Green Party, German MP in the European Parliament. You can watch that full interview on our website, int.hromadske.tv. You can also download our app. You can listen to this whole show in podcast form, and you can also get access to all of our expanded content on our website, again, int.hromadske.tv. And we'll be back with you in 1 second. The leak of documents from Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca at the beginning of April unleashed political crises around the world while providing journalists with a boon to investigate ill-gotten gains. It's also shed a light on a global shadow economy that's engineered to help the rich and powerful avoid paying the taxes that the rest of us pay, because we feel like we maybe owe a debt to society. I don't know. But a number of the rich and powerful have already had to resign from top-level positions because of the leak. That includes David Johansson, the Prime Minister of Iceland, the Spanish Ministry of Industry, José Manuel Soria, the Chilean head of Transparency International, Gonzalo de la Veo, who ironically, it turns out, had a offshore, Michael Gramhammer, the chief executive of a major Austrian bank, and an Uruguayan member of FIFA's independent ethics committee, Juan Pedro Damiani. And that being said, in spite of all of these repercussions around the world, there's still not been a single Panama Papers related civil or criminal investigation in Ukraine, despite a lot of pressure placed on President Poroshenko for it being revealed that he had offshores to allegedly help with the transfer of Russian. It's really a lot of questions about rule of law here, and it's raised even more questions because the people who took the most heat from the whole thing were the journalists at Hromadske Sledstvo that exposed the entire mess in the first place. So it's not, it does not bode well, you might say. But we did an interview with Lilia Shevtsova, an expert at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, about the fallout from the Panama Papers. She said some interesting stuff, and she especially, I thought was interesting, noted that an entire sort of service class, entire economy has emerged around laundering corrupt money from the former Soviet Union. So have a look.
Lilia, my first question, Panama Papers. What is the influence on Russian elites, and how do you think they will react on it?
Well, Panama Gate, Panama Paper, of course, became absolutely a crucial blow to the behavior and to the emotions and feeling of themselves when we are talking about the Russian establishment and Russian political class and business class. Because in fact, the Russian elite survives by personally integrating itself into the outside world. How they will react further, well, God knows. They will be trying to find much more elaborate mechanism of money laundering. But definitely, this is a very important, maybe crucial factor that will influence their attitude towards Putin and towards regime.
Do you think that Panama Papers give a sign also to Western powers that much more can be done to limit the possibilities of Russian elites to act? Much more could be done to freeze their assets, etc.?
I'm pretty skeptical about the Western reaction because, well, so far the Western political class and Western business, cannot function without dirty money coming from Russia, Azerbaijan, before Libya, well, Kazakhstan, etc. There is a huge class, service class, that has been, that has emerged around the laundry machine, around Panama, around British Virgin Islands, etc. So there will be a very strong resistance in the West on the part of the Western political class, family of Cameron or family of some other political leaders, in order just to water down the effect of the Panama Gate, because they still need, dirty money, for re-energizing themselves.
Do you think that the cases of Georgia, Ukraine, Syria, maybe Nagorno-Karabakh are cases which show that Russia is trying to confront with the West on numerous fronts? And if yes, what other actions can be expected?
You know, the situation is much more fluid, the situation of liquidity. The problem is for the West that what they see, not only confrontation on the part of Russia, on the part of the Kremlin. The Kremlin is pursuing much more, I would say, much more polyphonic policy. On the one hand, containment of the West inside of the former Soviet Union. On the other hand, cooperation. So it's a kind of policy of being with the West, inside of the West, and containing the West. So the West is at a loss how to react to this.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
So that was Lilia Shevtsova, an expert at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. You can follow all of our coverage again on our YouTube channel. You can go to int.hromadske.tv to follow all of our coverage on the Panama Papers and the ongoing fallout, political and otherwise, from them. You can also follow the Kyiv Post for the same coverage, I should note. And with that, I would like to bid you farewell for tonight. My name is Josh Kavensky. I'm a reporter at the Kyiv Post. And before I say goodbye, I should remind you to follow again Kyiv Post for all print coverage of Ukraine and Hromadske for televised coverage of the same. And before I go, you should watch a video that we put together at Hromadske on the new ProZero public procurement system and how it is attempting to change the stakes of the game in Ukraine regarding public procurement, which has long been a source of corruption. So thank you.
Більше 300 людей приймали участь в тому, щоб прозоро відбулося. Справді, там ми невеличкою групою колись це придумали, але це шалена купа людей. Так, аукціон відбувається в 3 раунди. І кожен учасник може зробити або залишити свою ціну, або понизити свою ціну. Ідея в тому, що останній ставить той, хто був мінімальний в попередньому раунді. І загалом система трошки тисне на всіх постачальників, щоб вони з самого початку давали нормальну свою мінімальну ціну, щоб якщо хтось понизився, вони могли там ще відповісти. Як було. Тобто постачальник роздруковує свою пропозицію, підкладає всі довідки, запаковує в конверт, пропечатує цей конверт і відсилає або відносить його замовнику. Розповідали історії цікаві, коли в нормальних таких тендерах ці конверти, пересувні лабораторії стояли під тендерними комітетами, коли ці конверти розпаковувались, розшивались, обережненько щось виривалось звідти. І потім постачальнику казали, слухай, в тебе класна пропозиція, реальна, але розумієш, на 325-й сторінці в тебе немає печатки підпису. Вибач. От зараз, коли це все в електронному вигляді, воно все є в системі, нікуди не треба їхати, жодних конвертів, одна точка контролю, центральна база даних, яка нормально захищена, і наш Держспецзв'язок дивиться, щоб там все було окей. Наші громадяни трошки більш суб'єктніше будуть себе вести. Тобто не будуть чекати, що прийде якийсь там супер, не знаю, президент, прем'єр, ще хтось, і все полагодить. Я власник моєї країни, я контролюю, що в моїй країні відбувається. От така ідея.
Є прогноз, до речі, скільки можна буде зекономити за рік? За 15-й рік пілот зекономив 500 мільйонів гривень. Зараз розмір економії вже 1,3 мільярди. Спочатку, тобто, умовно, з 1 січня ми зекономили додатково ще близько 800 мільйонів. План на 16-й рік на це близько 5 мільярдів гривень економії. План на 2017 рік, вже коли система буде працювати повністю, тобто з 1 січня до 31 грудня в обов'язковому режимі, близько 50 мільярдів гривень економії.
Hromadske презентує «Митна родина. Як фіскали ховають свої статки і повертають втрачені посади».
Этот человек, он знает, что такое таможня, он знает, где какие дырки, как их правильно закрывать.
Пристосуванці. Як закликати до співпраці з окупантом і далі робити успішну кар'єру.
Мы приезжали, месяц или 2 там водки попили где-то в штабе там, вот, и получили УБД. Здравствуйте.
Просто бізнес. Кому підуть державні гроші на одеський аеропорт?
Плевать я хотел, кто это, Грановский, Кауфман или даже Коломойский. Лишь бы они построили.
Бізнес на покійниках у Миколаєві. Як міліцейські фірми заробляють на вивезенні трупів.
Частный предприниматель вынес тело, положил его уже в свой катафалк, приезжает спецсервис и начинает вытаскивать тело из катафалки.
Проект журналістських розслідувань «Слідство.Інфо». Дивіться в середу, 27 квітня о 21:00.
Передайте всем, завтра собираемся 10-тысячным митингом, всех на площадь. Передавайте, не слышно. Площадь Ленина, 6 часов. 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 Площадь Ленина, 6 часов.
Одна з ключових реформ в країні.
Всі реформи.
Податкова реформа.
Реформи Верховної Ради України.
Реформи МВД.
Політики весь час говорять про реформи, а ми покажемо, як вони працюють.
Або не працюють, бо є закони на папері, а є реальне життя.
Ми поїдемо до людей на місця і подивимося, як і чому пробуксовують, здавалося б, прогресивні норми.
Ми знайдемо успішні приклади і поділимося ними, а проблемні питання переадресуємо законодавцям.
Змінюватися завжди важко, але без цього ніяк.
Щопонеділка о 21-й. Реформа.